Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. Welcome back to Cracklin' Rosie True Crime. I've been on a lot of channels yesterday and the day before, and I heard that there's going to be a lot of people who are home on their own for the holidays. I'm home today by choice, but I thought it would be really fun to come on and say hello. Cheers. Merry Christmas to all of you that celebrate. And even if you don't, I hope that this day finds you in a place of peace and gratitude. So cheers and welcome. So I have some fun stuff for you today. I'm still working with my software and whatnot, so bear with me if the live is not perfect. Life isn't perfect, but here I am, and I hope to get to share a few laughs with you today. My channel's relatively new, so I don't expect a lot of people in chat, though I will check it periodically. I am live. This is not a premiere. And if you miss the live, it will stay up, so hopefully you'll get to see it a little bit later. So today, we're going to have some fun going through some ghost stories of Christmas, a chilling Victorian tradition. I found a fun article for you that shares top 10 bizarre historical crimes that you may not have heard of. And I found another article, 10 ridiculous Christmas crimes. So we should have some fun today. But before I share screen or anything like that, I just want you to know that this time of year certainly can be magical for some, and for others not so magical. So if you would just keep your heart open, always steer for the light, and don't get caught up in the materialistic mess that everybody has made of this season. If you have friends or family that you're able to share time with, just cherish those times. This season is not about gifts. When we say it's about giving, there's so much more that we can give than gifts. We can give of ourselves, we can give friendship, and you never have to be alone. Whenever I feel alone, there are so many soup kitchens in the area that they are more than happy to have you share time with them and volunteer. And a lot of times we think that we're giving to others, and actually those acts, those selfless acts, we really give a lot of warmth to ourselves. So I hope you're having a nice day. You know, before we get into the actual materials that I pulled, I'm going to try to share screen with you. Yesterday, Christmas Eve morning, I went out, got a cup of coffee, and went and sat by the river, and it was so peaceful. So I'm going to start off seeing if there's a way that I could share that with you. Let me pause this. I see it beautifully on my end. Let me see if I can share it with you. Again, I'm working my way through this, so have patience. Oh, I think I have it. Yeah. Can you see that? This is the beautiful Halifax River in Ormond Beach, Florida, and I'm so grateful to be able to go and just look at this beautiful body of water. I'm not seeing it on the screen. Let me try again. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Okay, I think that you can see it now, so I'm just going to play it for you. It's a great place where people go to fish, paddleboard, walk the bridge, as you'll see in a minute. It's just absolutely beautiful. And this is one of the side parks. So let me play this for you. Well, I'm going to play it again. I'm sorry. I didn't have the sound on the video on. So let me go ahead and put that on and play it again. It's very short. I think you'll enjoy it though. The sheer beauty of it is worth watching. Merry Christmas Eve, everyone. Enjoying a great cup of coffee by the beautiful Halifax River. It's a beautiful day. The temperature is gorgeous, somewhere in the 70s. Let's get a picture of our beautiful bridge. Not too much traffic today. Everyone's probably home stressing about all the materialism of this holiday season. But we're not. We're just enjoying the peace. Beautiful Ormond Beach. So grateful to be here today. Merry Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas Eve, everyone. Enjoy. All right. Okay, I'm back. I just wanted to share that with you. That bridge is such a beautiful place of healing. And at the foot of either side of the bridge are parks. Really cool. And across the street from the more east end over the bridge on our beach side, there's the historical house from John D. Rockefeller, which is called the Casements. And across of the street there is the Casements Park. And there's a nice little stage and there's a grass area and then an area where you can walk and just walk alongside of the eastern edge of the Halifax River. If you go to the other side on the foot of the bridge, there's the what's the name? Fortunato Park. And there's ducks and places to park. And there's also some historical sites there. It's very beautiful. When you walk over the bridge, there is an old historic church in the northwest end of the bridge. And then across that is called Cason Park, I believe. And that's where if you're lucky enough to have a boat or jet skis, there's all landings there, strips where you can park your car and then you can put the vessel into the water. And it's all part of your property tax, so you don't have to pay every time that you go to the park and launch your boat or your jet ski. So it's really very beautiful. You can walk the bridge and all of the parks in a nice, comfortable pace in about 40 minutes or so. That's, we like to walk slow. We get a bunch of friends together and we walk and we talk and it feels like 10 minutes, but it usually runs about 40 minutes and you could usually get a good 2 to 3 miles depending on if you do. There's also a pier that runs underneath the bridge, which is super cool. And you could either warm up on the pier or you could cool down. We usually like to cool down at the pier. So next time I do a bridge hike with my hiking friends, maybe I'll record that for you. I don't know how the wind would be. I don't have fancy camera equipment, just my cell phone, but I could try it. And if the quality is decent, I'd be happy to share it with you. I love this area. And since I'm a lot of the times a loner, I just love to do stuff like that. Hike, walk the bridge, walk the beach, look at the river, just enjoy what is so beautiful right there in front of me in the moment. So that helps me get through the blues too during these times. So I hope you enjoyed that little video. So we're going to get into our Victorian ghost stories. So this is a little article that I found from High Culture, and it looks like it was published December 20th, 2019, and it's titled Ghost Stories of Christmas, a Chilling Victorian Tradition. So I'm kind of debating here. I guess, yeah, let me share the screen. Why not? I think you'll enjoy. So some pretty pictures. So let's try that. And I think it worked. So I don't know if High Culture is a section of this big Think media source, but you could see it on screens, so I'm not trying to snatch anything or claim that it's mine. It was just a really interesting article that I found, and I thought it might be fun to share it with you. So it says here, here's why scary stories were once an integral part of Christmas Eve festivities. So we're going back to Victorian times. Gathering around a fire to share ghost stories was a beloved Christmas tradition in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Victorians also sent bizarre Christmas cards with morbidly humorous designs featuring murderous frogs and anthropomorphic insects. Historically, December 25th has a close link to pre-Christian solstice festivals that viewed midwinter as a time when light dies and the veil between the world of the living and the dead is most thin. Here's another neat picture. I hope that you can see that nicely. Despite its cheerful overtones today, Christmas during the Victorian era was the time to tell tales more chilling than icy winter nights and send morbid holiday cards. So can you imagine that, how much it's changed? So this is a photo source from the British Library. I guess that must have been one of the card fronts. Christmas's spooky heritage. As the carousel of endless holiday songs pervades the backgrounds of our lives this time of year, you might have noticed a peculiar line that goes, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago." It's heard in Andy Williams' 1963 holiday classic, The Most Wonderful Time of Year, as the singer lists off festive traditions associated with the holidays. So we all know that line, but we never gave it any thought, or at least I never did. This is all new to me. I hope it is to you too, and I hope that you're finding it interesting. As it turns out, gathering around a fire to share ghost stories was actually a beloved Christmas tradition in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Frigid temperatures and long nights were considered the best conditions to share grim stories. Nothing satisfies us on Christmas Eve but to hear each other tell authentic anecdotes about specters, wrote British travel writer and humorist Jerome K. Jerome in the introduction of his 1891 anthology of Christmas ghost stories, told after supper. The most famous example is, of course, Charles Dickens' 1843 tale, A Christmas Carol, in the holiday classic, originally titled A Ghost Story of Christmas. Four phantoms visit the curmudgeon Ebenezer Scrooge to scare his greedy soul straight. The supernatural literary hit was inextricably bound to the heritage of holiday ghost stories in Britain. American author Henry James cemented the eerie tradition into U.S. culture when he published his story, The Turn of the Screw, in 1898. The novella, about a chilling series of supposedly ghostly events that befall a young governess, begins with men gathered around a fire sharing spooky stories on Christmas Eve. The American Goth legend Edgar Allan Poe also set his unsettling poem The Raven in the bleak month of December. The tradition lingered until the early 20th century, with magazines regularly running ghost stories in their Christmas issues. There's a frog dancing with an insect of some sort. And it says, "May Christmas be merry." Of course, Getty Images owns it now. They own every image. Okay, so now the tradition about the bizarre cards, we're always looking, a little sip of my drink here, we're always looking for the perfect card for our loved ones. Can you imagine that there was a time where the cards were eerie and bizarre? So I'll read you a little bit of that. This old tradition offers context to some of the bizarre Victorian Christmas cards. Among the dark, outlandish designs included macabre images like a murderous frog stabbing and looting a fellow amphibian, St. Nicholas peeping through windows and stuffing children into his gift sack, giant waltzing insects and dead robins, a far cry from today's festive saccharine cards. Isn't that true? Wow. Victorians wanted their cards to serve as shocking conversation starters, and some of the morbidly outlandish designs were influenced by folklore customs. For instance, in English myths, robins and wrens were considered sacred species. According to John Grossman, author of Christmas Curiosities, Old, Dark, and Forgotten Christmas, images of dead birds might have been used to elicit Victorian sympathy and may reference common stories of poor children freezing to death at Christmas. How horrible! The legend of Santa Claus was much more sinister during the Victorian era as well. An English legend had him paired up with the devil in a good cop, bad cop duo to figure out which children had been naughty, which had been nice, and how their fate should be carried out. Ooh, horrible. The devil, sometimes guised as Krampus, kidnapped and beat disobedient children, while Santa was often depicted in Christmas cards slinking around and spying on children through windows. How scary is that for children? Christmas's supernatural roots. So where exactly did these supernatural elements come from? Historically, December 25th actually has had a closer link to pre-Christian festivals that honored the winter solstice than with Christianity. Mistletoe, holly berries, wreaths, and Yule logs, for instance, are all pagan symbols. Puritan leaders even tried to abolish Christmas at one point because there was no biblical basis for celebrating the day. Celebrations like Yuletide symbolically celebrate death of light and the longest night of the year. For this reason, the date was considered to be the most haunted, as the veil between the realms of the living and the dead were gossamer sheer. Perhaps it's also because, without the luxury of modern medicine and healthcare, the chilly breath of death always felt a bit close during the winter, a season particularly fraught with illness. Conditions were ripe for conditions were ripe for imaginations to run wild with what might await beyond the grave. In fact, in Shakespeare's 1611 play, The Winter's Tale, Mallemus proclaims, "A sad tale's best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins." Later, thanks to traditions adopted by Irish and Scottish immigrants, Halloween was embraced in the United States and designated the official spooky season, while Christmas was purified. But perhaps this year, after wrapping presents, snacking on holiday cookies, and sipping on mulled wine, sorry, I added my own cider, you might consider inviting loved ones to gather around the fire to share ghost stories or summon specters for a Christmas Eve seance, in the spirit of tradition. Okay, I'm going to stop this screen share. So what did you think of that? That was pretty interesting. I know some of the histories with regards to the solstice, but I didn't know the Victorian traditions and how gruesome the Christmas stories were. So imagine if we did that today. I bet a bunch of you wouldn't do that with your children or grandchildren. All right, I'm going to take a 2-second break here just to double check the chat, make sure it's under control, and it looks like it is. Wonderful. Hey, if you're watching me, please don't be shy. Drop a hello in the chat. If you catch this after the live, please drop me a message in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. This is very different from what we normally do at the channel. If you enjoy the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and if you hit the bell, you'll be notified when we go live. Once this channel grows and becomes more popular, we will have more live streaming, but right now we're putting out a little bit more on the premiere side and having pretty good results with that. But as we grow, we will offer more content more regularly. So I hope that you enjoyed that little story. I found it very interesting, and anybody who's interested, I'm happy to drop the link in comments if you want to read it all again. I just found that so interesting, or if you want to dig a little deeper like we do in the true crime community, right? That's what we know how to do. So let me close that one out, and let's see what we have here. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to share with you, let's see, I want to make sure that I'm giving the proper credit. So it looks like this is from a periodical called Society Crime. I don't think I'm going to share the screen. This one's a short one. And the words are pretty small. I can barely see them. I actually ought to get my glasses, or I should have had them here. Let me get a little sippy here. Cheers, y'all. I'm so happy to be here with you. I hope that some people get to see this and enjoy it. So this is an article written by Delilah Rainey, and it was published on April 2017, and the title's called Top 10 Bizarre Historical Crimes You Haven't Heard of. I figured I'd throw in a few of these. I was thinking that these were all on Christmas, but that's okay. So let me begin. History is full of strange crimes, crazed criminals, and skilled imposters. Listverse has covered many of these odd historical events and personages, from the lesbian nun scandal to the woman who posed as the Maid of Norway and was buried alive for her efforts, to the mass murderer who claimed to have sodomized more than 1,000 men. Oh, I should have read this before I'm reading it to you, huh? But here are 10 incredibly bizarre historical crimes that very few people have heard of. Welcome to the twisted world of the criminals who have been lost in history. So, number 10, the escaped convict who became a false princess. And these are all old, so I picked them intentionally old because it is Christmas and I didn't want to go into sad cases where people who are alive and were involved in them may see this and not feel happy. Let me just get comfortable. Y'all know I'm a floor sitter, so I just need to switch my left leg to right. Okay. In 1771, a royal maid named Sarah Wilson was sentenced to death for stealing royal jewelry and a tiny portrait of Queen Charlotte, along with one of the Queen's dresses. Wilson's mistress stepped in on her behalf and narrowly escaped execution. Wilson was transported to America on a prison ship and promptly sold to a wealthy plantation owner. Wilson did not take well to slavery and escaped shortly after arriving at her new workplace. Somehow, nobody could explain this. She was still in possession of the jewels, the dress, and the portrait she had initially stolen. Using these items as proof, Wilson claimed to be Princess Susanna Caroline Matilda, sister to Queen Charlotte. Princess Susanna claimed she had been exiled to America after an undisclosed scandal. For 2 years, the false princess lived in luxury, wanting for nothing, as wealthy colonial families, the gentlemen especially, showered her with gifts in hopes of winning her royal favor. So she was a thief. She was exiled to America, and here she's pawning herself off as a princess. This is hilarious. Eventually, the guy she had been sold to figured out who the false princess really was. He offered a reward for her return, and she was promptly marched back to his plantation at gunpoint. So that was short-lived. One would think her story would end there, but 2 years later, Wilson swapped identities with another woman and escaped again. She fled northwards and eventually married a British Army officer. Wilson was never convicted for being an imposter, and in 1774, it was remarked in a Rhode Island paper that Sarah Wilson is the most surprising genius of the female sex that was ever obliged to visit America. So she got away with, it doesn't say if they ever took anything back that was stolen. It doesn't sound that way. All right. So that was number 10. That was a pretty cool story. Number 9, when Margaret Bill Allen was in a funny mood. In 1906, Margaret Allen was born the 20th of 22 children from a young age. Oh, sorry. Didn't see that pyramid. You know what? I'm going to go get my glasses. Enjoy a sip of your beverage, and I'll be right back. I'm back. Holy crap, they were like at the bottom of my dance bag, and of course they were on the bottom. Okay. This way I could say see periods properly and I could read to you. All right. There they go. Hopefully the screen doesn't give you lots of light stuff. Okay. So let's go back. In 1906, Margaret Allen was born, the 20th of 22 children. From a young age, Margaret shunned dresses and refused to do female chores. preferring to shovel coal and do household repairs. By 1935, Margaret was telling friends that she had been to hospital to have a delicate operation that turned her from a woman to a man. Now, this is highly unlikely. These days, Margaret would be recognized as a transgender person and could seek support, but back then, she was considered little more than an oddity. She called herself Bill, wore men's clothes, and worked as a bus conductor before she was fired for whacking people over the back of the head if they did not find a seat fast enough. That's funny. On August 24th, 1948, Margaret committed a crime that still baffles many today, as no one can work out exactly what her motivation was. An eccentric elderly neighbor, who allegedly was extremely annoying, knocked on Margaret's door asking to borrow a cup of sugar. So people really do that. Margaret let the old woman inside, then battered her to death with a coal hammer. Ooh, that's gruesome. Margaret was eventually arrested and confessed to the murder, saying that on the spur of the moment, she grabbed the hammer and hit the old woman with it more than once. I was in one of my funny moods, was the only real explanation that Margaret could give. Margaret Bill Allen was sentenced to death. She was forced to wear a dress when she was executed by hanging on January 12th, 1949. That's not that old. To me, it's not. Some of you kids, I'm sure it is. All right. So let's see. Number 8. The woman who wore the clothes of the girls her husband murdered. Oh, this one's going to be good. Let me get a sip. Okay. In 1861, Marie Pichon accepted an offer of work from a kindly seeming man who led her into the woods as darkness fell, then attempted to strangle her. Marie managed to escape, and after a terrifying chase through the woods to a nearby village, she was able to identify Martin Dumoulard to authorities by the large swelling over his lip. Dumoulard's property was searched, and 2 bodies were found in varying stages of decomposition. Piles of female clothing were found inside the property, many garments containing bloodstains. Mrs. Dumoulard had been wearing many of the clothes despite knowing they belonged to murdered women, and the amount of clothing found far exceeded the number of bodies the police were able to uncover. How gruesome. Dumoulard was eventually found guilty of 6 murders, including a case where a female corpse had been found in the woods near his house in 1855. The woman had been brutally assaulted before death, and her corpse had been subjected to gross outrage. So you can use your imagination there. It was also concluded that one of the victims had been buried alive, and she had died with her fingers digging into the soil above her, which is how her corpse was found when she was unearthed. All the dead were women who had been led to Dumoulard's property with the promise of work. Oh. Dumoulard was executed by guillotine in 1862. His fate was kinder than that of his father, who had been torn apart by galloping horses as punishment for his part in a plot to kill the King of Austria. Mrs. Dumoulin was sentenced to 20 years in prison and hard labor for her complicity in Dumoulard's crimes. Ooh! Those are crazy. I hope you're enjoying these. Number 7 is the Butcher of Berlin. So this should be interesting. Again, I'm not sharing the screen because the print is so small. Actually, let me see if I can make it bigger for my own self. Oh, I did. Excellent. And then this way I don't have to lean forward so much. Okay. So we're on the Butcher of Berlin. Karl Grossman already had a long criminal history of violence, bestiality, and child molestation by the time he rented a filthy apartment in the slums of Berlin in 1920s. Neighbors often heard screaming coming from his rooms, but this sort of thing was so common that no one thought to contact police. Hello. He had an unusually high amount of female visitors, and the ones that survived later claimed he subjected them to all kinds of sexual violence after they returned to his apartment with the promise of work. Here's another one. You have to be careful. Make sure you go to an interview in a public place, yeah? Okay. Suspicions were not raised until more than 20 dismembered bodies were discovered in nearby waterways, and police declared they had a serial killer on the loose. Authorities were alerted the next time the screaming started in Grossman's rooms, and in August 1921, the police busted his door open to find him standing over the bound corpse of a woman he had just killed. Evidence of at least 2 more murders that happened in only the past few weeks was also found in his apartment. He was suspected of at least 23 murders, but hanged himself on July 5th, 1922, before he could be executed. Grossman was given the title the Butcher of Berlin. So if I have any friends out there from the Berlin area, you may be very versed in this story. Share what you know. As a result of the bizarre rumors surrounding his crimes, he spent much his time in Berlin's Silesian train station, correct me, which is where he picked up many of the women he would take back to his apartment to sexually abuse and murder. Some sources claim that he sold hot dogs to hungry travelers at the station and that he seemed to have a copious supply of meat. Ew. Despite the food shortages in Berlin at the time. I don't like where that went. It has been speculated that the meat he sold to travelers was cut from the women he murdered, many of whom were travelers themselves that he met while plying his wares. Ugh, gross. That one was gross. Okay. Number 6, the woman who helped her husband chop off his own leg. This should be interesting. All right. In her late teens, a foundling named Martha Lowenstein inherited a wealthy estate from Moritz Fritsch, who had taken her in as his ward and lover the year before. The inheritance money was not enough to sustain the extravagant lifestyle of Martha and her new husband, Emil Marak, with whom she had been having an affair since before Fritsch had died. Once the inheritance was gone, the couple became desperate for more money. In an epic attempt at fooling an insurance company out of a large sum of money, the couple tried to cut off Emil's leg. but they could not quite detach it completely. Insurers did not believe the story that Emil had an accident while chopping wood, as doctors found that the almost severed limb had been hacked 3 times. The leg had to be amputated, and to add insult to injury, the couple were charged with insurance fraud, and Martha was jailed for 4 months for trying to bribe a nurse during the investigation. People crazy what they do for money. After Martha's release from prison, people developed the unfortunate habit of dying around her. She was later imprisoned for yet another insurance fraud, and it was then that the son of one of Martha's deceased lodgers called for an investigation. His mother's body was exhumed along with the bodies of the now deceased Emil. Along with the bodies of the now deceased Emil, Martha, and Emil's daughter, and Martha's aunt. A rare metallic poison called thallium was found in all of the corpses. Martha's son was also found to be dying of thallium poisoning and was rushed to the hospital. So Martha turned on Emil also, who was her lover when she was married to Fritz. Crazy. Okay, Martha insisted she was innocent, but was found guilty after a chemist revealed she had regularly purchased thallium at his store. Busted. Martha was executed by guillotine on December 6, 1938. You go, guillotine. This one's going to be weird. Trigger warning here. Y'all know my channel is not made for children. It's made for adults. We're a true crime community. Okay, number 5. The necrophile who wanted to be handsome. This should be interesting. This is newer. From 1971 to 1972, police had been investigating a series of bizarre crimes in which corpses had been exhumed from their graves and interfered with, quotes. The 5 corpses showed evidence of being bitten and gnawed. Some had been mutilated and cut, and in the case of the females, it was clear that sexual activity had been attempted. Then on May 6, 1972, a young couple were shot dead in their car. The corpse of the female showed evidence that the murderer had been trying to drink her blood and had attempted posthumous sexual activity. Later, another woman was shot, and the same posthumous rituals were carried out on her corpse. Then a mortuary worker was shot when he surprised a man kissing the corpse of a 15-year-old girl. The mortuary worker survived and eventually identified Kuno Hoffman as the man who shot him. Hoffman confessed to the bizarre graveyard crimes and the 3 more recent murders. The necrophile had to explain his motivations through a translator, as he had been abused so severely as a child that he was left deaf and mute. He had spent 9 of his 41 years in prison and finally turned to the occult in hopes of finding a better life for himself. After studying books on Satanism and witchcraft, he had become convinced that by performing certain rituals on the dead, he could become handsome and popular. When exhuming corpses from graves had failed, he decided the bodies must need to be fresh for his rituals to succeed. So after doing all this craziness with the corpses and it wasn't working, he decided he needed the bodies fresher. He turned to murder in the hopes of attaining the elusive handsomeness he dreamed of. His plans failed. However, Ankuno Hoffman was confined to an asylum for life. We're coming down. We're at 4. The preacher who ordered her followers to crucify her. Have a sip of water for this one. Are you enjoying? Let me take a breath here just to make sure that we're not ignoring anyone in chat. There's a few people in there, but not writing anything. That's okay. Just listen and enjoy. Remember, most of you will miss this live and you'll catch it after the live. Feel free, enjoy, and leave your comments. All right, so back to the preacher who ordered her followers to crucify her. Margarita Peter was fiercely religious, and she spent 3 years in her 20s wandering Switzerland preaching the word of God. By age 29, when she settled back down in her family home, she had gathered a small but loyal congregation about her, which included many of her immediate family members. This sounds like it's going to be interesting. Soon after she returned home in 1823, Margarita became convinced the devil was living in the rafters of their home. Claiming herself to be the Messiah, she declared battle against Satan. Margarita and her followers began to smash up the house with farm implements. Then, at Margarita's command, they turned the implements on each other. The insane preacher then proclaimed that she herself must be sacrificed, but her sister Elizabeth volunteered to die in Margarita's place. Margarita and her loyal followers then beat Elizabeth to death, eventually crushing her skull. The madness did not end there, as Margarita then demanded she be crucified, believing she must suffer and die to save the souls of the damned. Her loyal flock tore up floorboards and arranged them in a cross, which Margarita laid down upon. They drove nails through her hands, feet, elbows, and breasts, as Margarita loudly proclaimed she would rise again in 3 days. Oh, on her command, they then crushed her skull with a hammer. Believing both Margarita and Elizabeth would be resurrected, the flock waited with the bodies as they began to rot. Police eventually arrived, and the entire congregation was arrested and jailed. The house was condemned and torn down, and the land was declared unfit to build on ever again. The only account that remains of this event was obtained directly from the trial records at the time of eyewitness accounts. Elizabeth and Margarita did not return from the dead after 3 days. Okay, we're coming down on the top 10 countdown. And we're at number 3, the nun who ate her secret lover's excrement. I thought this would be really cool and stories we all never heard of, so I didn't pre-read them because I wanted to share the experience with you. So now I'm kind of wondering if I should have pre-read, and it's all good. We're all adults. Okay. When she was 13, Mariana de Leva's wealthy father forced her into the Santa Margherita convent in Monza. She took well to the pious living. Initially, changing her name to Virginia and becoming a teacher and role model to the younger girls. In her 20s, however, things changed. Sister Virginia fell in love with a wealthy young nobleman called Gianpaolo Osio. Osio or Osio. Correct me if you know this story. Who had a terrible reputation as a womanizer, and there were even rumors he had killed people. Virginia and Osio's sexual liaisons were carried out in her rooms in the convent. In the years that their secret affair lasted, Virginia birthed 2 children. How did she have children in the convent? I'm going to have to do some deep diving into this one. The first baby was a stillborn boy. The second, a daughter. Osio officially recognized as his own illegitimate offspring. The love affair was a rocky one, I'd say, and Virginia often became depressed and even suicidal, plagued with guilt about the unholy affair. In the hopes of turning her lust to repulsion, she turned to the magical art. Okay, my magic friends, you might correct me on this. The magical art of coprophagia. Please correct me. I'm not a magical I'm a magical person. I'm just not into magic. Okay, coprophagia. Eating Osio's feces. Some sources claim she drank the superstitious remedy in tea, and some claim she ate her lover's excrement dry and sprinkled over liver and onions. Whatever her method, the bizarre medicine failed to quell her lust, and in 1606, a disgruntled novice threatened to expose the scandalous affair. Osio killed and beheaded the girl, burying her body in the monastery chicken coop. Virginia then helped him make a hole in the monastery wall to make it appear as though the girl had escaped. However, rumors continued to spread, and to cover his tracks, Osio killed multiple people, including some of Virginia's friends, who had supplied Virginia with abortifacients, and the blacksmith who had supplied Osio with duplicate keys to the monastery. So I have to do some dictionary work after this live. Let me highlight that for myself. Okay. Virginia appears to have been complicit in all of the murders, desperate to keep the scandal a secret. In the ensuing investigation into the murders and the affair, multiple people were tortured, including Virginia and Osio, not sure. Osio was condemned to death but escaped, only to be killed later by a friend. Virginia was sentenced to life in solitary confinement, bricked up in a 4-foot by 9-foot room in the convent of S. Valeria, which was seen by many as more of a prison. 14 years later, Virginia was considered reformed and released from her cell. She became a sort of Mother Teresa figure to novices at the convent, many of them prostitutes seeking salvation. What a story. Okay. We are down to number 2. Let's get a little sip here. Cheers again. So our number 2 most bizarre crime that you probably don't know about is called From Crazed Acid Torturer to Medical Missionary. Woo! Girl, boy, whoever's listening. Okay. Dr. Giza de Camplani was a freedom fighter in the Hungarian Revolution before he fled the war and eventually settled in America. The doctor had impeccable credentials. He had taught anesthesiology at Yale and was licensed to practice medicine in 4 American states. De Camplani, He was from Hungary, so if I have any Hungarian friends, let me know what the proper pronunciation is that. But we'll say De Camplani, 36, was working as a respected anesthesiast when he married Hajna Pillar, a beautiful 25-year-old showgirl who left her job to be with him. The couple had been married for just 5 weeks when police were called to their apartment on August 28, 1962. These aren't all that old. Before my time, but not that much before my time. Responding officers found that De Camplani had turned the couple's apartment into an acid torture chamber. Hajna had been bound with electrical wire and bathed in nitric acid from her genitals to her hairline, with particular attention paid to the vag, the breasts, and the eyes. The doctor had cut her breasts before pouring acid into the wounds. After 3 hours of torturing her, he called the police. Hajna suffered third-degree corrosive burns to 60% of her body, and emergency medics burned their hands on her skin as they tried to move her. How horrific. What provoked this brutal attack? Hajna had inquired about a modeling job against her husband's wishes, and he had heard rumors that she'd been unfaithful. He decided to destroy her beauty so no man would ever look at her again. It took 33 days for Hajna to die an agonizing death in the hospital as her skin turned to leather and fell off her body. Jealousy at its finest. The doctor was sentenced to life in prison, but his story does not end there. 13 years later, De Camplani was released from prison on parole, and that same day, he flew to Taiwan to begin work as a medical missionary in 2002, folks. Mercury News reporters tracked De Camplani down to where he was living with a new wife in Germany. Now 70, he had become a German citizen, so he could not be extradited to America and charged for his numerous parole violations over the decades. I have done one mistake in my life. I paid enough for it. That was all he would say. Excuse me, I think Hajna would think a little bit differently. All right, folks, we're down to the number 1 most bizarre crimes that you may never heard of. The kindly, caring midwife who brutally tortured her serving girl to death. In the mid-1760s, the overseers of London parish appointed Elizabeth Brownrigg as the official midwife for destitute women. Everyone who knew her considered her very kind, considerate, and caring. So it came as a great shock when a baker's apprentice looked into the Brownriggs' backyard and saw a girl that he later described as in a very deplorable, bloody, shocking condition. The girl was 14-year-old Mary Clifford, taken in as an apprentice by the Brownriggs from a local workhouse. The baker's apprentice, William Clipson, told his mistress what he had seen, and they went to the authorities. The Brownriggs were eventually taken into custody after they handed over two girls, Mary Mitchell and Mary Clifford. Clifford had been beaten so badly her mouth was swollen open and could not close, and her neck was so swollen that it extended out as far as her chin. She had scars, slices, and open sores from the soles of her feet to the top of her head. Many of her wounds were in a state of mortification from neglect. Clifford died of her injuries almost a week later, and in the trial that followed, the horrors the girls had both faced were revealed. For months on end, my glasses aren't helping that much? No, they are. For months on end, the girls had been subjected to brutal, prolonged torture at the hands of Elizabeth Brownrigg. Suspended from hooks in the ceiling, they had been stripped naked and beaten and whipped for hours on end. They were starved, forced to sleep in the freezing cold cellar, and often forced to work naked while enduring repeated beatings and humiliations. At one point, Clifford tried to seek help and had her tongue sliced open in two places for punishment. So she tried getting help, she was caught, and her tongue was slit open in two places. I don't know if you ever bit your tongue, but imagine it being sliced. Another girl named Mary Jones had escaped months earlier after she had been subjected for hours daily to a form of waterboarding torture. By the time she escaped, she was blind in one eye, emaciated, and covered in cuts and bruises. She had begged authorities to rescue Mitchell, but nothing was done, and soon after Jones's escape, Mary Clifford was taken into the Brownriggs' home. So law enforcement or the authorities had been notified of crimes being committed in this household. Nothing was done, and there were still girls coming into the household. Mr. Brownrigg and their 18-year-old son were both found guilty of abusing Sarah Mitchell. They were sentenced to 6 months in prison and fined 1 shilling each. Some punishment, huh? Elizabeth Brownrigg was found guilty of the murder of Mary Clifford. She was executed by hanging on September 14th, 1767. And that was our number 1. All right. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. And I'll come back to you on I guess I've been large screen to you all the time. Make me large screen to myself. Could take off the glasses. So wow, what did you think of some of those stories? I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that if you're alone this holiday season that you listen in and, doesn't have to be my community, but there's such a big YouTube community, whether it's true crime that you're interested in, cooking, crafts, poetry, music, dance. There's so much going on. join in. There's lots of chat activity. So other people who like to tune in to the channels will go into what they call the live chat. And, you get to know people. And even though it's just on YouTube, you still do, in closer knit communities, you do still get to make friends. And that's what I'm hoping will happen with this channel. I'd like to keep it at a nice, of course love for it to grow, but I would also love for it to remain a tight community where people want to come in and they want to chat and they want to share their knowledge on different cases. So today we're totally off the cuff. I mean, we didn't cover any specific case that we've been working on in this channel or on this channel, but I just thought I'd bring you some fun stuff to burn a little time with you this Christmas. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that if you missed the live that you stay for the whole thing. The stories are very interesting, and I've got them saved on my system here. So if anybody is interested in diving a little deeper, I could send you those links. Just let us know in the comments. I'm for sure going back, rereading them, because remember, I went on the fly. I wanted to share the information live with you and also learn myself. So I know my reading's not fabulous, but I hope it was okay. I hope it was nice enough and understandable for you. But I'm definitely going back and looking into a few of those cases. So we'll see what we can find. Some of them were for the 1700s, 1800s, but there were a few that went into early 1900s. So I'm sure we could find a little bit more. So if you're interested, drop me a note, drop me a comment. Please don't forget to subscribe, like our videos. That's the way you could support our channel. And I hope you enjoyed. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and take a break, finish up my cranberry juice, and maybe we'll come back live later tonight. I know a lot of people may be cooking and may have missed this, or maybe they went out to enjoy the beautiful day. So maybe we'll come back on again later tonight and read a little something less macabre, something a little bit more Christmassy. I don't know. All right, guys, have a beautiful day. Merry Christmas if you celebrate, or just happiness, joy, and peace in whatever you celebrate. Have a wonderful day. And thank you for joining me, Cracklin' Rosie, with Cracklin' Rosie True Crime. All right.